When Claire married Mark 2 years ago, she believed she had finally found her forever partner, a man kind, dependable, and deeply devoted to his teenage son, Ethan. From the beginning, Claire knew marrying a widower meant inheriting a family still healing from loss. Ethan's mother had died when he was only 12, leaving him quiet and withdrawn. Claire entered the marriage with compassion, ready to be patient, gentle, and understanding. She never wanted to replace Ethan's mother, only to build a bond founded on respect and trust. The first few weeks seemed promising. Ethan was polite, though distant, always greeting her with a forced hi before retreating into his room. Claire tried small gestures, making his favorite breakfast, asking about his day, offering help with school projects, but each effort seemed to push him further away. When Mark was around, Ethan was courteous, even charming. But when it was just the two of them, he turned cold, his eyes avoiding hers, his tone clipped and dismissive. Claire told herself it was just grief, that he missed his mother and didn't want anyone taking her place. Mark reassured her with a smile, saying, "He just needs time, honey. He'll come around." But as the months passed, the emotional distance between them widened. Claire started to feel like a guest in her own home, tiptoeing around her stepson's moods, afraid of doing something wrong. Still, she kept trying. She decorated the house with warmth, soft colors, family photos, and a sense of togetherness she'd always dreamed of. Every night, she cooked dinner and waited for them both to eat together. Mark appreciated it, often thanking her for her effort, but Ethan made excuses to avoid family meals. When he did show up, he scrolled through his phone or left early, muttering something about homework. The few times she tried to talk to Mark about it, he dismissed her concerns gently but firmly. "He's 17, Claire. Teenagers can be moody. Don't take it personally." She wanted to believe him. But there was something sharper than moodiness in Ethan's eyes, something guarded, almost resentful. One afternoon, she overheard him on the phone with a friend, referring to her as Dad's new wife instead of her name. It stung more than she expected. She realized then that no matter how kind she was, Ethan didn't see her as part of his family. That night, as she watched Mark and Ethan laugh over a movie, she felt both love and loneliness sitting side by side in her chest. Still, Claire clung to hope. She believed families took time to blend, that patience and kindness would eventually be enough. But deep down, a quiet unease began to grow. Something told her that Ethan's coldness wasn't just about grief or rebellion. It was something deeper, something personal, and though she couldn't yet name it, Claire had the sinking feeling that her silence, her desperate attempt to keep the peace, might one day cost her far more than she imagined. As the months rolled by, Claire's optimism began to crumble under the steady weight of Ethan's behavior. What had started as cold indifference turned into subtle, deliberate disrespect. At first it was small things, ignoring her greetings, rolling his eyes when she spoke, or pretending not to hear her requests. But soon, those quiet dismissals grew bolder, more venomous, like he was testing how far he could push before she broke. Ethan began avoiding her completely when Mark wasn't home. He'd retreat into his room with the door locked, blasting loud music that made the walls vibrate. When Claire asked him to turn it down, he'd smirk and say, "It's my house too, you know." There was no trace of the polite boy she'd met a year ago. Instead, his tone dripped with entitlement, as if every rule, every boundary she tried to set was an insult to his existence. At dinner, his sarcasm sharpened. He'd make subtle jabs. "I miss how Dad used to cook before we had a live-in chef," or, "Guess we're doing things your way again, huh?" He knew how to strike where it hurt, how to make her look controlling without saying anything directly cruel. In front of Mark, he was charming, even affectionate. But when Mark left the room, Ethan's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, challenging stare that chilled Claire to her core. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, grew tense and quiet. Claire began noticing strange things. Her favorite earrings missing from the vanity, her perfume half empty, framed photos slightly tilted or gone entirely. Once she found a family picture she'd cherished, the three of them smiling at the lake, hidden in the trash, the frame cracked. When she confronted Ethan, he shrugged and said, Maybe it fell. Don't blame me for your clumsiness. Mark, ever the peacemaker, brushed it all off as teenage rebellion. He's just adjusting, Claire, he'd say, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Give him time. But each time Mark excused Ethan's actions, Claire felt her authority and her place in the home slipping away. She began questioning herself, wondering if she was too harsh, too sensitive, or perhaps not motherly enough. But deep down, she knew something darker was brewing. The real breaking point came one weekend when Mark invited some friends over for dinner. Claire spent all day cooking and setting the table beautifully. As they ate, Ethan made a cruel joke about her cooking, imitating her voice in front of everyone. The guests laughed awkwardly, unsure how to respond. Mark tried to smooth it over, but Claire could feel the humiliation burning in her chest. For the first time, she saw it clearly. Ethan wasn't just acting out. He was asserting dominance, pushing her out, testing whether she had the courage to fight back. That night, as she cleaned up alone, Claire's hands trembled. She realized she had allowed disrespect to grow roots in her home. And if she didn't stop it soon, it would consume everything she had built, her peace, her marriage, and her sense of self. It was a quiet Thursday evening when the fragile calm in Claire's home finally shattered. Mark had left early that morning for a 2-day business trip, leaving Claire and Ethan alone for the first time in months. Though she tried to see it as a chance to mend things, an uneasy feeling followed her all day, a whisper of dread she couldn't quite explain. Ethan hadn't come home from school at his usual time. Hours passed. Claire called his phone several times, but it went straight to voicemail. By midnight, she sat on the couch, anxiety twisting her stomach. Just as she debated calling Mark, the front door creaked open. Ethan stumbled in, reeking of alcohol, his clothes wrinkled, eyes glazed over with defiance. "Ethan," Claire said softly, standing from the couch. "Where have you been?" "Do you know what time it is?" He laughed. A cruel, slurred sound that didn't belong to the polite boy his father thought he knew. "Why do you care?" "You're not my mother." The words hit harder than a slap. Claire steadied her voice, trying not to react. "I'm not trying to be your mother. But this is my home too, and you can't come in drunk at 1 a.m. He took a few steps toward her, swaying slightly. "You think you can tell me what to do? You've been pretending since day one. You think Dad doesn't notice?" His voice dripped with venom. "You act like some perfect wife, but you're just trying to control everything." Claire's heart raced. She'd seen flashes of his anger before, but never like this. Never so unfiltered, so personal. "I'm not your enemy, Ethan," she said quietly. "I just want us to respect each other." That was when he smirked, a dark, mocking grin. "Respect? You haven't earned that." He brushed past her roughly, snatching his car keys from the counter. Claire moved instinctively, blocking his path. "You're not driving anywhere in this condition." For a split second, his eyes flickered with something dangerous. Then he shoved her hand aside, not hard enough to knock her down, but with enough force to make her stumble back. "Don't touch me," he snapped, his voice low and sharp. Claire froze, her chest tight. The room seemed smaller, colder. For the first time, she wasn't just dealing with a difficult teenager. She was afraid of him. Ethan stormed upstairs, slamming his door so hard that the picture frames on the wall rattled. She stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door, her hand still trembling. Her mind raced with confusion, fear, and heartbreak. How had things come to this? How had her home, the place she'd dreamed of filling with warmth, turned into a battlefield of resentment? That night, Claire didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the first light of dawn break through the curtains, her heart heavy with realization. Something had changed irrevocably. This wasn't about patience anymore. It was about survival, emotional, and maybe even physical. And for the first time, Claire knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. The morning after Ethan came home drunk, the house was eerily silent. Claire moved through the kitchen like a ghost, her hands trembling as she made coffee she couldn't bring herself to drink. She replayed the night in her head, his laughter, his shove, that cruel smirk. It wasn't just teenage rebellion anymore. Something inside Ethan had shifted, and she knew she could no longer dismiss it as grief or immaturity. When she finally gathered the courage to go upstairs, Ethan's bedroom door was ajar. His bed was unmade, the floor cluttered with clothes and empty bottles. She noticed her missing perfume bottle sitting on his desk, nearly empty. Next to it was a small family photo, the three of them smiling at the lake. The glass cracked, her face scribbled over with black marker. For a long moment she couldn't move. The image said everything his words hadn't. You don't belong here. Claire felt something in her chest break. She had tolerated the disrespect, the lies, the small cruelties, all for the sake of peace. But this was different. This was deliberate, malicious. She picked up the photo frame and stared at it until tears blurred her vision. Then, for the first time, she made a choice. Not to cry, not to hide, but to act. She began keeping a quiet record of everything. The late nights, the lies, the missing items, the comments that cut deep. It wasn't out of revenge, it was protection. If Mark refused to see what was happening, she needed proof. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between her and Ethan only grew. He stopped hiding his contempt. He'd mutter under his breath when she passed, slam doors after she spoke, and spread small lies to Mark, accusing her of yelling at him or overreacting to harmless jokes. Each lie chipped away at her marriage, until she saw confusion in Mark's eyes when he looked at her, doubt where trust had once been. One afternoon, out of desperation, Claire reached out to Ethan's school counselor. The woman hesitated, then sighed heavily. He's been struggling, Mrs. Turner, she admitted. There have been reports of bullying, and he was caught cheating on an exam. He's angry at everything. That night, Claire sat alone in the living room, clutching the counselor's words like a lifeline. For so long she had believed silence was love, that patience would heal him. But now she saw the truth. Silence had allowed his bitterness to grow unchecked. The final straw came a week later. When she returned home from the grocery store, she found the living room in disarray. The same torn family photo she'd found upstairs now lay in pieces on the floor, this time ripped in half deliberately. It was his message, loud and clear. As she stared down at it, something inside her hardened. Fear gave way to resolve. She couldn't keep protecting Mark from the truth or herself from the pain. Ethan had crossed too many lines, and it was time to draw one of her own. That night, Claire picked up her phone, opened her notebook of evidence, and made a promise to herself. The next time Mark came home, she would finally tell him everything. When Mark returned home from his business trip, Claire could feel her heart pounding as he walked through the door. His easy smile and cheerful voice filled the house with a warmth that felt painfully unfamiliar after the weeks of silence and hostility. For a moment, she almost lost her resolve. She wanted to hug him, pretend everything was fine, and forget the tension that had poisoned their home. But then she remembered the photo, ripped in half, and the look in Ethan's eyes when he'd shoved her. That memory burned away her hesitation. That evening, after dinner, Claire asked Mark to sit down with her in the living room. Her voice trembled slightly as she said, "Mark, there's something I need to tell you, and I need you to really listen." Mark frowned, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "Of course, what's wrong?" She took a deep breath, opened her notebook, and began to tell him everything. Every insult, every act of disrespect, every moment of fear. She spoke quietly but firmly, laying out the details she had carefully documented. The missing items, the vandalized photos, the late nights, the shove. Then with shaking hands, she played the voice recording she'd taken a few days earlier. Ethan mocking her, calling her names, laughing about how easily he could manipulate his father's trust. Mark's face drained of color. At first he sat frozen, staring at her as if she were speaking another language. Then he shook his head. No, that can't be right. Ethan wouldn't... Mark, she interrupted gently, tears welling in her eyes. Please, I didn't want to believe it either. But it's happening. He's angry, he's cruel, and he's taking it out on me. I can't live like this anymore. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mark rubbed his face with both hands, torn between love for his son and disbelief at what he was hearing. He's been through so much, he whispered. Losing his mother. Maybe he just doesn't know how to cope. I understand that, Claire said softly. I've tried to help him, to be patient, to give him space. But Mark, this isn't grief anymore. It's cruelty, and if you keep excusing it, you're teaching him that it's okay to treat people this way. Mark looked at her then. Really looked at her. The exhaustion in her eyes, the tremor in her voice, the quiet strength it had taken for her to speak up. He realized how blind he had been, how many times he had chosen comfort over truth. That night, Mark called Ethan downstairs. The confrontation that followed was loud and painful. Ethan denied everything at first, shouting that Claire was lying, that she hated him. But when Mark played the recording, Ethan's defiance faltered. The truth hung in the air like smoke, bitter, undeniable. Mark didn't yell. He simply said, voice heavy with heartbreak, "This ends now." For the first time, Ethan had no response. Claire sat in silence, tears rolling down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from relief. After months of silence and fear, she had finally spoken the truth. And even if everything changed after that night, at least she had found her voice again. The days that followed the confrontation were heavy with silence. The house, once tense with anger, now felt hollow, stripped bare by truth. Ethan locked himself in his room, emerging only for meals, his eyes avoiding both Claire and Mark. For the first time, there were no lies, no sarcastic remarks, no shouting matches, only quiet, uncomfortable honesty. Mark was a different man, too. The shock of hearing Ethan's cruelty had left him raw, humbled, and filled with regret. He spent hours replaying the voice recording, studying the pain on Claire's face, and realizing how deeply he had failed both his wife and his son. One night he found her sitting alone in the living room, staring at the empty couch across from her, the same spot where she had first told him everything. "I should have listened to you sooner," he said softly, his voice thick with remorse. "I thought I was protecting Ethan, but I was really just protecting myself, from admitting I was losing control of him." Claire didn't respond right away. Her eyes glistened with tears, but they weren't angry. "We both wanted peace," she said quietly. "We just went about it differently." "I thought silence would keep us together, but it only made things worse." From that night on, things began to shift, slowly, painfully, but genuinely. Mark sat down with Ethan and laid down clear, firm boundaries. Respect would be non-negotiable, counseling would be mandatory, and Claire's authority in the house would be upheld. It wasn't an easy conversation. Ethan lashed out at first, accusing Claire of turning his father against him. But Mark didn't back down. For the first time, he chose accountability over denial. Weeks passed, and though Ethan remained distant, his anger softened at the edges. Therapy forced him to confront his grief, not just for his mother, but for the broken family he thought he'd lost forever. Slowly, he began to see that Claire wasn't the enemy. She hadn't taken his mother's place. She'd tried to fill the emptiness with warmth, patience, and care. One afternoon, when Mark was at work, Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway while Claire was preparing lunch. He stood there for a long time, silent, before muttering, "I shouldn't have said those things to you." Claire turned to face him, her heart aching at the awkward sincerity in his voice. "I know," she said softly, "and I forgive you. It wasn't a magical fix, not a movie-perfect ending, but it was real." From that moment, something fragile but hopeful began to rebuild between them. By the end of the year, the home felt different. The laughter that returned wasn't forced, and the quiet moments weren't filled with fear. Mark and Claire grew closer through honesty, and Ethan, though still guarded, began to open up in small, cautious ways. Claire often reflected on how close she had come to losing everything, her peace, her marriage, her sense of worth. But speaking up had changed everything. It hadn't destroyed the family. It had saved it. She learned that silence can keep a home standing, but truth is what makes it worth living in.